always begin with something obvious. A creepy house, a strange noise, somebody acting dangerous right away. But the truth is, the scariest situations usually start out feeling completely normal. That's exactly what happened here. The narrator and his girlfriend Stacy had been overwhelmed by life for months. Money was tight, stress was constant, and the routine of everyday life was slowly draining both of them mentally. Stacy suggested renting a cabin in the woods for a few days just to disconnect from everything. Somewhere quiet, somewhere warm, somewhere that felt peaceful enough to forget about real life for a while. The narrator loved the idea immediately, but there was one problem. They couldn't really afford it. That's when Stacy came up with another plan. They could invite the narrator's best friend Randy and his girlfriend to split the cost and turn the trip into a fun couple's getaway. At first, everything seemed perfect. Randy agreed instantly, and all four of them started planning meals, games, and activities for the trip. But less than a week before they were supposed to leave, Randy's relationship completely exploded. The breakup was messy, sudden, and emotional. The narrator even offered Randy his money back multiple times because it didn't feel right taking his share if he wasn't going anymore. But Randy insisted they still take the trip. For a moment, it looked like the cabin weekend would become a quiet, romantic getaway after all. Then everything changed again. Only a day later, Randy called and said he had already found someone new to bring with him, a girl named Lucy. The narrator immediately felt uncomfortable about it. Stacy felt the same way. Nobody wants to spend a weekend trapped inside a cabin in the middle of nowhere with a complete stranger, especially one that even Randy barely knew himself. But Randy kept pushing. He promised Lucy was sweet. He promised they'd all get along. He even offered to pay for the narrator's entire portion of the trip just to convince them. Eventually, against their better judgment, they agreed. And the second they met Lucy during the drive up to the cabin, something already felt off. She barely spoke the entire ride. Stacy and the narrator tried making conversation over and over again, but Lucy mostly gave short answers or awkward smiles. It wasn't that she seemed rude, it was almost worse than that. She seemed emotionally disconnected, like she wasn't fully present with everyone else in the truck. The silence became uncomfortable fast, and nobody realized it yet, but that quiet, awkward drive was the first warning sign that this trip was about to become something none of them would ever forget. When they finally arrived at the cabin, things actually seemed to improve for a little while. Everyone unpacked their bags, started a fire, and settled into the cozy atmosphere they had imagined for weeks. For a brief moment, the narrator thought maybe they had judged Lucy too quickly. She still wasn't very talkative, but she at least seemed calmer and more comfortable than she did during the drive. Later that evening, Stacy suggested playing Uno near the fireplace, since it was one of their favorite games to bring on trips. It sounded harmless, simple, exactly the kind of thing you do during a relaxing weekend in the woods. At first, the game went completely normal. Randy loosened up, the narrator was joking around, and even Lucy finally seemed to come out of her shell a little bit. But then something happened that completely changed the mood inside the cabin. Stacy called out Uno, signaling she only had one card left. The second Lucy heard it, her entire personality shifted instantly. She stared directly at Stacy with this look of genuine anger and suddenly started accusing her of cheating. At first, everyone laughed because they thought she was joking. The reaction felt so extreme that it almost had to be sarcasm, but Lucy wasn't joking at all. In fact, the laughter seemed to make her even angrier. Within seconds, she was screaming, not annoyed, not playfully competitive, actually screaming at Stacy over a game of Uno. Her face turned red, her voice cracked with rage, and she kept insisting there was no possible way Stacy could have only one card left unless she cheated. Stacy tried defending herself while also awkwardly laughing because the entire situation felt ridiculous, but Lucy just kept escalating. It was like watching someone completely lose emotional control over nothing. Randy tried calming her down, but Lucy suddenly threw all of her cards across the room before storming out. The cabin fell dead silent after she left. Nobody knew what to say. Randy apologized over and over, while the narrator and Stacy tried brushing it off like it wasn't a huge deal. But deep down, they were both disturbed by how fast Lucy's behavior changed, and somehow the night got even stranger later during dinner. Lucy returned acting completely normal, almost like the meltdown never happened. She laughed casually, smiled, and started oversharing deeply personal details about her relationship with Randy in front of everyone. The narrator could tell Randy was embarrassed, but Lucy didn't seem to notice or care. The emotional whiplash was unsettling. One minute she was screaming over a card game, and the next she was calmly talking like nothing happened. That was the moment the narrator started realizing this wasn't just awkward behavior anymore. Something about Lucy genuinely felt unstable. And once everyone finally went to bed, the trip became terrifying in a way none of them could have predicted. Sometime in the middle of the night, the narrator woke up to the sound of somebody whispering his name. Still half asleep, he opened his eyes and nearly jumped out of bed when he saw Randy standing over him in the darkness. Randy looked terrified, not nervous or uncomfortable, completely terrified. His face was pale, his breathing was shaky, and he immediately asked if he could stay in their room for the night and lock the door behind him. At first, the narrator thought maybe Randy and Lucy had another argument, but then Randy explained what actually happened. He said he woke up during the night and saw Lucy standing silently at the foot of the bed, just staring at him. She wasn't saying anything, she was just watching him sleep in complete darkness. When he finally asked her what she was doing, she calmly shrugged and said she was watching him just in case. That answer alone was unsettling enough, but then Randy noticed something beside her side of the bed after she walked away. Hidden partially under the blanket was a large kitchen knife. The second he saw it, panic completely took over. Randy quietly left the room to look for Lucy, and that's when things somehow became even more disturbing. He found her wandering around the dark cabin alone, humming softly to herself while pacing through the living room, almost like she was dancing. Randy said it looked similar to sleepwalking, but there was something deeply wrong about it. At one point, the floor creaked beneath him, and Lucy immediately stopped humming. Lucy was gone. Randy looked outside and saw her walking directly into the freezing woods. Without even fully turning toward him, she calmly whispered, "I see you." In the woods, Randy made the narrator's stomach drop. Nobody knew whether Lucy was awake, sleepwalking. Randy said it didn't even look like she was actually looking at him. After that, she simply continued pacing through the darkness like nothing happened. Hearing all of this while trapped in a cabin deep in the woods, mentally unstable or something even worse. While they were trying to process the situation, they suddenly heard the cabin's front door slam shut. They opened the bedroom door and realized Lucy was wearing only a t-shirt and shorts. Then he rushed back to his room and discovered the knife had disappeared.
That was the moment true fear settled over everyone. Stacy wanted to go outside and help Lucy because she thought maybe she was genuinely sick or sleepwalking. Randy wanted absolutely nothing to do with her anymore. He was convinced something dangerous was happening. As they argued quietly inside the bedroom, they suddenly heard the cabin door open again. Then came the sound of slow footsteps moving down the hallway. Lucy was back inside the cabin, still humming softly to herself in the darkness.
Nobody slept for the rest of the night. Every sound inside the cabin felt amplified. Every creak of the floorboards made the tension worse. The narrator, Stacy, and Randy stayed locked inside the bedroom together, listening to Lucy moving around the cabin until sunrise finally came. Around 6 in the morning, they heard normal kitchen noises and cautiously walked out to investigate. To their shock, Lucy was casually washing dishes and greeting everyone with a smile, like absolutely nothing unusual had happened the night before. She looked rested, calm, and completely normal. Stacy immediately tried rationalizing everything. She suggested maybe Lucy had some kind of sleep disorder or night terrors. Even the narrator wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation because the alternative was much scarier. But Randy clearly didn't buy it anymore. He barely spoke during breakfast and looked genuinely shaken. A few minutes later, Randy secretly texted the narrator asking him to come to the bedroom immediately without telling the others. When the narrator walked inside, Randy silently pointed toward Lucy's bag. While packing his things earlier, he accidentally shifted the bag and a large knife had fallen partially out of one of the compartments, the exact same knife he had seen hidden beside the bed during the night. The realization hit instantly. Lucy hadn't been sleepwalking with some random object. She knowingly had the knife with her the entire time. Randy was visibly panicking now. He carefully placed the knife back into the bag because he didn't want Lucy realizing they found it. From that moment forward, the only thing any of them cared about was getting home safely. The drive back felt painfully tense. Nobody wanted to upset Lucy, so everyone pretended the weekend had been normal, but the fear inside the vehicle was impossible to ignore. The narrator kept thinking about the image of her standing over Randy's bed in the darkness, about her humming through the cabin with a knife, about the way she whispered, "I see you." The second Randy got home, he completely ghosted her. No explanation, no goodbye, nothing. And strangely, Lucy never contacted him either. No angry messages, no attempts to reconnect. It was almost like she disappeared overnight. Over the years, Stacy occasionally tried searching for Lucy online out of curiosity, social media, public records, even inmate databases, but she never found a single trace of her existence. No photos, no profiles, nothing connected to the name Lucy at all. That discovery disturbed them almost as much as the knife itself, because if Lucy wasn't even using her real name, then who exactly had they spent that weekend with, and what were her actual intentions that night inside the cabin? For a long time, the narrator considered himself the type of person who genuinely preferred being alone. Not in the normal way, where somebody enjoys quiet every now and then, but in a much deeper way that slowly started separating him from other people entirely. Everyday conversations exhausted him. Crowded places made his anxiety spiral. Even simple interactions started feeling overwhelming. Over time, he developed a habit that most people around him found strange. Whenever he had enough money saved up, he would rent isolated cabins deep in the woods just to disappear for a few days. No people, no traffic, no distractions, just silence. At first, those trips felt therapeutic. He would spend the weekends hiking through forests, reading books near fireplaces, and enjoying the peaceful isolation that came with being completely alone in nature. But during one particular trip, that sense of peace slowly transformed into pure paranoia. The weekend began normally enough. He drove a couple hours out to a secluded cabin, unpacked his things, cooked a small dinner, and spent the first night reading quietly before going to bed early. The next morning, he decided to take a long hike through the surrounding woods. Being outside had always helped calm his thoughts, especially when life became overwhelming. But not long into the hike, he started hearing strange noises behind him. At first, it sounded subtle, twigs snapping, branches shifting, the kind of sounds you could easily dismiss as animals moving through the forest. But the more he listened, the more deliberate the sounds became. It started feeling less like random nature noises and more like footsteps trying to stay hidden. Every time he turned around, the woods behind him were empty. No movement, no people, nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched kept growing stronger with every step. His anxiety slowly took control of his thoughts until he couldn't even enjoy the hike anymore. Eventually, he turned around and headed back toward the cabin earlier than planned. That night, the paranoia stayed with him. He tried distracting himself with music and alcohol, hoping the nervous feeling would disappear, and for a while it actually worked. But around 11 p.m., everything changed. He suddenly heard knocking at the cabin door. At first, he thought maybe the alcohol was messing with his head, because when he checked the window, nobody was there. But seconds later, another knock echoed through the cabin. This time, when he looked outside, someone was standing in the darkness, waiting for him. The second the narrator turned on the porch light, confusion immediately replaced fear for a moment. The man standing outside the cabin looked completely normal. In fact, he looked too normal. He was tall, clean-shaven, wearing a perfectly fitted suit with slicked-back hair like he had just walked out of a business meeting instead of wandering through the woods in the middle of the night. Nothing about him matched the environment around him. The narrator opened the small window in the heavy wooden door just enough to speak and cautiously asked if he needed help. What happened next instantly made the situation feel wrong. Before answering, the man paused for an unusually long time, almost like he was processing how to respond. Then, in an emotionless voice, completely lacking panic or urgency, he explained that he and his girlfriend had been driving nearby earlier when she disappeared. He claimed he had spent hours searching for her in the woods and was now lost himself. Then he calmly asked if he could come inside the cabin to call for help. Normally, the story might have sounded believable, but something about the way he spoke made the narrator deeply uncomfortable. This did not sound like a desperate man searching for someone he loved. His voice was hollow, empty, almost robotic. The narrator immediately refused and instead offered to call the police for him while he waited outside. Another long pause followed. The man slowly looked around the dark woods before quietly saying something that instantly raised the tension inside the cabin. He claimed there was something outside and that he needed to hide inside the cabin before it found him. The narrator's instincts immediately screamed that something was seriously wrong. He told the stranger again that he was not opening the door and started walking away to grab his phone. That's when the pounding began.
Suddenly, the man started violently slamming both fists against the cabin door, hard enough to shake the walls. The narrator rushed back toward the entrance, screaming threats and curses, trying to scare the man away. Then, in the middle of the chaos, the pounding stopped completely. Silence filled the cabin for one horrifying second before the narrator heard something even worse. Laughter. Calm, quiet laughter. He looked toward the small window and nearly collapsed in shock. The stranger's face was now pressed directly against the glass, only inches away from his own, smiling. In a calm voice, the man whispered, "Come on, Victor, just open the door already." The narrator froze instantly. He had never told the stranger his name.
Pure panic took over the moment the stranger said his name. The narrator immediately stepped away from the door and dialed 911 while trying to explain to the operator that a man was attempting to break into the cabin. But by the time the call ended and he looked back outside, the stranger had vanished completely. The woods surrounding the cabin were silent again. For nearly 15 minutes, the narrator stood frozen near the window, staring into the darkness, expecting the man to reappear at any second. But nothing moved. No footsteps, no sounds, no sign the stranger had ever been there at all. Eventually, a single police officer arrived at the cabin. The narrator quickly let him inside and explained everything that happened, including the disturbing moment where the stranger somehow knew his name. Even the officer seemed unsettled by the story, though he admitted nobody else in the area had reported anything suspicious that night. The officer suggested that maybe the narrator should leave and stay at a hotel in town if he no longer felt safe at the cabin. The narrator agreed immediately, but there was one problem. He had been drinking and didn't trust himself to drive. Thankfully, the officer offered to take him into town personally. For a moment, it finally felt like the nightmare was ending. But then, while they were walking toward the police car, the officer suddenly stopped moving. The narrator noticed his expression on his face change instantly. Confused, he asked what was wrong. The officer silently pointed toward the narrator's vehicle sitting in the driveway. All 4 tires had been slashed, completely destroyed. The realization hit immediately. The stranger never planned on leaving him alone at that cabin. He wanted to trap him there. Suddenly, the entire interaction at the door felt even darker. The emotionless voice, the fake story about the missing girlfriend, the repeated requests to come inside, none of it felt random anymore. The officer quickly got the narrator into the police car and drove him to a nearby hotel while helping calm him down during the drive. The next morning, his father came to help tow the damaged vehicle back home. The cabin owner apologized repeatedly for what happened, but the narrator barely cared anymore. He just wanted the experience to be over. Even years later, he still thinks about the stranger in the suit sometimes, especially the way he smiled through the glass after saying his name. The most terrifying part wasn't even what happened that night. It was knowing he never got any answers. The stranger was never identified, never caught, and somewhere out there, that same man could still be standing outside somebody else's door, deep in the woods, waiting to be invited inside.
About 6 months after his father passed away, the narrator learned that he had inherited his father's old cabin deep in the woods. Their relationship had always been complicated. His father wasn't necessarily cruel, but they never understood each other emotionally.
Growing up, the narrator always felt like he'd disappointed him simply by being different. So when he discovered the cabin had been left to him in the will, he wasn't emotional about it. If anything, he assumed his father expected him to sell it eventually. But before putting the property on the market, he needed to clean it up and handle some repairs first. He decided staying there one final weekend might give him some kind of closure. The moment he stepped inside the cabin, though, he immediately regretted the decision. The smell hit him first. It was overwhelming, thick, rotten, and almost impossible to describe. It genuinely smelled like something had died inside the walls. Even stranger, the cabin itself looked completely frozen in time. The exact same furniture from his childhood still sat untouched in the same places, the same stained couches, the same bookshelves, the same decorations. It felt less like entering a home and more like stepping into a preserved memory nobody had touched in years. While cleaning downstairs, he kept hearing movement above him, rustling noises, shifting sounds. At first, he assumed animals had gotten into the attic after the cabin sat empty for so long. Eventually, he climbed up the retractable ladder in the hallway, expecting to find raccoons or squirrels nesting somewhere in the insulation. Instead, he found something almost more disturbing. The attic was filthy beyond belief. Trash covered nearly every corner. Empty beer cans, food wrappers, old containers, and random garbage were scattered everywhere. The smell upstairs was even worse than downstairs, strong enough to make him cough immediately. The narrator knew his father had always been messy, but this level of filth felt extreme even for him. Exhausted from cleaning all day, he decided to deal with the attic later and headed to bed that night, still hearing occasional noises from above the ceiling. At first, he convinced himself animals were living inside the walls. That explanation helped him relax enough to fall asleep, but sometime during the night, he woke up again to the sound of movement directly above his head, and this time the noises sounded far too heavy to belong to an animal. Unable to fall back asleep, the narrator finally decided to investigate the attic noises one more time. When he walked into the hallway, he immediately noticed something strange. The attic ladder was already hanging down from the ceiling. He could have sworn he closed it earlier before going to bed, but at first he tried convincing himself maybe it simply hadn't latched properly. Then he noticed a fresh snack wrapper lying on the floor directly beneath the ladder. That wrapper hadn't been there before. Frustrated and exhausted, he picked it up, threw it away in the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water, and sat down in the dark living room, hoping to calm himself. The only light came from a weak orange lamp beside the couch, barely illuminating the room around him. Sitting there alone, he started thinking about his father and all the memories tied to the cabin. But slowly, another thought started creeping into his mind. Why would his father spend so much time inside that disgusting attic? The more he thought about it, the less sense it made. Then something in the corner of the room caught his attention. Near the recliner sat what looked like a blanket draped over a pile of objects. At first glance, nothing about it seemed unusual, but then the narrator realized something horrifying. He had cleaned that exact part of the room earlier that day, and he didn't remember any blanket being there at all. Slowly, he stood up and stepped closer. That's when he noticed the shape of a boot sticking out slightly from beneath the blanket. Instantly, every nerve in his body locked up. He froze completely while staring into the darkness. Then the blanket moved, Not slightly, not from wind, it clearly shifted upward and downward with the rhythm of breathing underneath it. Someone was hiding there. In that moment, every strange noise from the attic suddenly made sense. It wasn't animals moving around above the ceiling. It was a person. The narrator didn't scream or confront whoever was under the blanket. Survival instincts took over immediately. Without taking his eyes off the figure, he slowly backed into the kitchen, grabbed his keys and phone, then sprinted out the front door toward his car. As he reversed down the long driveway, he looked back toward the cabin one final time. A thin, mangy-looking man suddenly emerged from the front door and stood silently outside, watching the vehicle disappear into the darkness. The narrator called police immediately and explained everything. According to officers, because the cabin had sat mostly abandoned for so long, a homeless man likely moved in secretly for warmth and shelter. Judging by the smell and amount of trash upstairs, they believed he may have been living inside the attic for over a year without anyone knowing. By the time police searched the property, the man had vanished completely. The narrator never learned who he was or where he went afterward, but even now, the thought still terrifies him. For hours, he had been cleaning, eating, and sleeping inside that cabin, completely unaware another man had been secretly living only feet above his head the entire time.